I'm just doing a quick video before I go running. Russian President Vladimir Putin had a meeting in Turkmenistan. What's the geopolitical significance of Turkmenistan? Turkmenistan was a former member of the USSR, and is, very much considered, by the West, we say authoritarian regime. There's tight controls on information, high levels of corruption in elections and things like that. Despite being resource rich, they've done, super well. They've taken a neutral policy towards most foreign policy. And sort of the two most relevant pieces sort of outline, one of the possible areas of disagreement and conflict as, from sort of the perspective of maybe the West or someone else. And the sort of primary modes that they participate in. First, we can look at, energy. What are they called? There's like a form of sort of economic trade called a swap, where, basically in order to make supply chains more efficient, Turkmenistan can feed natural gas towards Iran, and Iran then in turn can take their natural gas, and instead of selling it to its own people, which doesn't really do anything, they can go sell it in Azerbaijan. And so, in order to sort of facilitate, this type of sort of trade agreement, and additionally you have the Ashgabat, it's a resolution or treaty, Ashgabat, and the sort of two components are investing first in industrial transportation, so basically like rail lines. We would presume sometime in the future there's, maybe more favorable agreements that make like air transportation or something else more reasonable, as well as creating almost like a free travel zone. So what does that mean? Is that like in the EU, where in the EU or in the US and Canada, you can just go to the border and show a passport, and it's like, hey, no big deal, it's easy for us to all talk. And it probably is, right? I think the main difference in interpretation, and this is like, like pretty innocuous, is you look at like Turkmenistan or Azerbaijan or somewhere, and you say, well, who's actually going to use this the most? What sort of economic products are going to be used the most? And it looks like this is just, this is most likely a way for, sort of people that support the regime, all this other stuff, are most likely going to produce more of the same things by traveling within these sort of very localized economic zones, creating sort of this, like, the right amount of leverage, in a globalized economy and stuff like this, and creating this sort of an understandable mechanism to push the sort of same things out that they've been doing, right, and start to move beyond that. The entire argument is generally that this is like really stripped of political context, right? Like, if you want to talk about like free markets and stuff, if there was a debate, what someone in Turkmenistan might say is that, like, well, if you look at the US's pursuing of AI or something simple that no one cares about, computing, look at the US, and we're basically, ready to like toss a Molotov cocktail at China. We're willing to do all these things to build these deeper relationships with Taiwan's high-tech sector, and to support the rest of sort of, wherever Southeast Asian computing development, whether it comes from Korea, Japan, or lands is developed in the US. And so, compare this to what like a quote-unquote authoritarian regime does. And they would say, well, look, we're a natural gas producer, and so any natural gas producer is going to want some leverage. They're going to want better trade agreements that are predictable over a longer period of time. So that's what this is. And when you talk about how capital, wealth, and all these other things are developed in like a market context or something like this, for us, the cultural context is that, we have the political and social mechanisms and tools that connect us to other aspects of BRICS with India. Um, they give us access to people in different economic groups, different economic zones. We can talk about, the IMF, or we can talk about like Islamic banking. We have tons of tools that we need that are necessary for us to develop, and this isn't at all like the U.S. Um, and so, this is, I don't know if there's a point to all of this. Um, yeah. Um, in the just in the context of when you have these sort of escalating regional conflicts, and someone like like President Putin with his current incursions in Russia, uh, may want like a super understandable conversation is saying that, like, look, if these conflicts are allowed to escalate and keep going further, um, and we're not able to talk about the core strategic and geopolitical drivers, um, what ends up happening is, are you still allowed to refuel planes if you're the U.S. in Turkmenistan? If you're possibly going on bombing runs or something, or you're possibly resupplying troops in U.S. positions, or you're possibly, delivering things to Israel, um, how does that fit this criteria of neutrality, um, right? Um, and so if, and from the U.S.'s perspective, if you're sort of combating this, a little on your back foot or whatever it is, um, you know, just the general argument is that, well, look, these governments and regimes have absolutely no accountability towards human rights or anything else that the rest of the world does, right? And so those people are also voting for the U.S. to have a position and have an opinion on stuff like this. And they may even be voting for us to have a position and have an opinion when we use interventionist policies in the Middle East, or with Iran or with Russia. And that is because there is absolutely no system of checks or balances except the, people would say, the long dick of the West, right? Um, so if you want to talk about neutrality agreements, well, as soon as there's, maybe there's absolutely no problem with Turkmenistan or something, right? This is how people can understand stuff. And so, um, you know, um, but if when geopolitical pressures mount, there's already necessarily a vote, right? Because you're generating billions of dollars for allies, money, cash that's eventually possibly funneled into aggressions or fueling aggressions. It doesn't intrinsically have some way that we can be better for it. Um, and so, um, most likely, whatever this meeting was or whatever in Turkmenistan is, who knows? Who knows? Hopefully, it's better ways that we can keep competing with one another in small ways, um, and at the same time, we're, you know, yeah, at the same time we're able to sort of find the blind spots where we can't see what's happening. Um, Not only the blind spots, but we're able to find actual mechanisms in society and governments. We're able to find meaningful levers within, possible conflicts wherever they are, where diplomatic platforms sort of lay this foundation for the next 10 or 15 years or something. Um, and so, I think the general argument is that, I think it's, it just sounds great as a free person that you can chase after this sort of neutrality position, But there's always got to be something else, right? And it's got to be something else, and it's got to be somehow supported within a broader strategic operating system, where you're saying everything is sort of leading or culminating to generally a more, if you want to say, a more peaceful form of existence. Um, you know, I think that's good. You can, one of the ways is like juxtaposing next to um, simplicity next to this like geopolitical position where you're in critical shipping lanes, and you have you have the influence and the ability to make conflict more or less expensive, um, more or less understandable in some senses, just based on that ability to remain neutral and sort of add that voice to whatever category it's supposed to be in. Um, yeah, and so this is, I think, always a challenge when you have sort of people say this sort of like new era of 2024 oligarchs, whether they're in energy or whether they're in technology companies, around the world, whatever they are. And at some point, they're necessarily their small portion of the society is more consequential. Um, and in a lot of ways, the job that they're trying to do and sort of the approach to it and everything, whether the approach is to compete brutally or it's to uh, you know, alternatively somehow, sort of turn around and build and support these social mechanisms which appear incapable of ever changing, um, and to sort of, to, you know, people want to say it's just ego, but, um, you know, maybe, who knows? I think that's one of those things that's sort of difficult to buy.